I have no slides. So this is just going to be a talk. I think they were getting frustrated with loading too many PPTs. So I said, but the construct of a slideware and talking to that is weirdly constraining. So I'm just going to talk freely, open to any questions. I will not answer any questions specifically about Akasa, but generically in terms of this is a conference on data analytics. If you want to talk about that, I'll talk to you about that. Right? Traditionally, I mean, if you look at it, airlines have actually been on the cutting edge of analytics for a long, long time. I mean, I think title of data scientist was prevalent in the airlines, I think in the 90s. I think I used to carry a designation called chief data scientist in 98, 99 before it became hugely popular. So I like to think I was ahead of my times, right? So I started off my career with American Airlines, went into data analytics for a while, ran my own startup. Now kind of one small startup was not punishment enough, so I decided to take another one. I'm here proof that to first refute Richard Branson, the famous quote that, if you want to be a millionaire, you start off by being a billionaire and start an airline. I'm neither a millionaire nor a billionaire, but I have got together with some equally crazy people to start up Akasa. How many of you at least don't know about Akasa? Then because I need to talk to my branding team and marketing team about how many people here haven't heard of Akasa? You haven't heard of Akasa? Okay, I need to have a serious chat with my branding team. How many of you have actually flown Akasa? This morning. Excellent. How was the experience? You have to say that, right? Okay. So one of the things that if you look at aviation, right, I get a lot of questions from my friends saying, what's aviation? Because aviation is one industry where everybody thinks they know how to run the business, right? So Twitter is rife with people who keep giving me advice on what I should do to run Akasa better, what I should do to do this better and that better, right? Valid points, but there's always a certain amount of pinch of salt that goes with that. So a lot of friends keep asking me like, how do you do this in the airlines? How do you do that in the airlines? And I figured this might be a good forum to just put it out in public so that I don't have to keep answering the same question again and again. So if you have a recording, I'd like to keep that so that I'll just forward that on to people and say, jo bhi sawal hai, udhar dekh. Right? So one thing about aviation, you're not audible. I'm not audible. Okay. This is better? Okay. So one thing you will see about airlines that sets it apart from a lot of industries is it is phenomenally capital intensive. Obviously, I mean, just getting aircraft together to operate an airline is phenomenally capital intensive and coupled with a very, very high operating costs. Now, I mean, people will tell you, if you look at it, 40% of an airline's cost in India is fuel. And we have no control over that. So, an environment like that, where it's heavily capital intensive, high operating cost, and massively regulated. People who come from BFSI will say, oh, banking is regulated. You don't even have a clue as to the level of regulation aviation has to go through. Because banking, if you run afoul of the regulator, at worst, you lose money. Here, lives are at stake, right? So, the level of regulation that aviation goes through worldwide, right? And India, I think, particularly more so. So, in an industry like that, people figured out long back that analytics, modeling, data science is the key to differentiation, right? Because you really need to squeeze every last bit out of the resources that you have. So what I'm going to do today is just touch upon broadly some of the different types of problems that we deal with and solve in aviation. Some of it we do in-house, some of it we buy commercial solutions because they're just too complicated. There are companies that have been building solutions like this for the last 30 years. I used to build some of those solutions. There's no point in reinventing the wheel because we want to focus on other things. So I'm going to just touch upon some of the types of problems that we deal with in aviation just to give a flavor for how challenging it can be. Right? So when I said sit back and enjoy your flight, right? Everybody's heard that statement. That's a standard line, everything. But what you have to understand is before you hear that line, there's about 2 years worth of work that has gone in to make it possible for somebody to come back and tell you, sit back, relax and enjoy your flight, right? When I say 2 years, it is 2 years, right? I mean, we've been working on Akasa from a concept for about 2 years now till we finally got our first birds flying on the 7th of August. It starts with your fleet, right? Because these are, like I said, high capital, long-term investments. I need to figure out which aircraft is going to be my mode of choice. Now, the choice of aircraft also determines where I can fly. So somewhere I have to have a broad notion of what market shall be operating. So when we come back and say, look, I'm going to be choosing the 737, it's got a certain range, which means I can operate up to a certain this one. Now, if I have to go beyond that, I have to have a different type of aircraft. Now, right now, we already have made plans of what the fleet we will have 10 years down the line. So, we have to think about it because I get an aircraft that's an asset I'm going to have for 10, 12 years on my books, right? Which means that I can't just swap out an aircraft. And if you look at a 320 or a 737, which is the predominant aircraft in India, it's got a range of about 5,000 kilometers, which means you just take a little compass, draw it, Gulf, Southeast Asia, domestic India, that's about it, right? So if you look at it, Indigo, for all this one, it still has not looked at going beyond Europe because their choice of fleet determines where they'll operate. Now, once a choice of fleet is made, right, accordingly, I have to have a supply of pilots, cabin crew who are all trained in that. Then once that is there, I have to determine where to fly. Now, when I say where to fly, I have to pick what stations I'll be operating in. And then we'll have to say, how many times will I fly in those stations? What time will I operate those flights? Again, a boatload of constraints that will be there. So the airports will come back and say, I'll give you a takeoff time at 6 a.m., right? Which means I have to figure out that I can take off from Bangalore at 6 a.m. I need to figure out where to fly the aircraft to. And I have to figure out which market has demand for people who will want to travel at 6 a.m. Like last night, I came back on a flight from Bombay, took off at 11, landed here at 1, right? So we have to figure out, okay, which markets actually have a demand for people who will be willing to travel at that godforsaken hour, right? Advantage with Bangalore and Mumbai is traffic is so bad that by the time you finish a business meeting, the only flight you can catch is at 11. I mean, if you have a flight at 7 o'clock, God help you, because so we leverage. So sometimes, these kind of traffic signals actually work to our advantage. And, it's a smart thing is how do you figure that out? So when we talk about a network plan, we do this down and then we come back and say, where can we fly? We start working with the airports to say, if I need to have a 5 a.m. departure, 5:30 a.m. departure, where will I start from? Now, given it's so capital intensive, and if you look at the broad tenets on any airline will work with. I'm not talking about Akasa. I promise you it's not about Akasa. There are 3 or 4 fundamental tenets that will go there, right? The first one with any airline will be safety, right? Safety is a non-negotiable. It's just, and the famous quote we have is somebody says, there is no cost-benefit analysis when it comes to safety. The cost of safety is the cost of your first incident. That's it. And those things will put you under. So safety is something that is so paramount. Every decision we take, right? So every airline will have somebody called as a chief of flight safety, and that person will be involved in every decision we take. So if my commercial team decides that, hey, we have to operate to Leh Ladakh, right? It has to be signed off by the chief of flight safety that our equipment is qualified to land in Ladakh. The pilots are sufficiently trained to land in Ladakh. So, and there are some airports that are always kind of what you call high risk or high difficulty in terms of landing and takeoff. Mangalore is one. I'm sure people have heard of the tabletop, things like that. So, and the head of flight safety will have to sign off. They will have to sanction a training program specifically for the pilots to be sufficiently trained to operate those. Okay? The second one will be reliability, dependability, which means that flights take off on time and the flights are not cancelled. Right? And as much as anybody will say, oh, this airline is the crappiest airline, they keep cancelling flights, they keep delaying flights, you have to understand no airline starts off saying we want to provide a crappy schedule reliability. Everybody starts off by saying and as I walk you through this, you will understand that when a flight gets delayed, it actually hurts them more than it hurts you, right? And I'll tell you the spill-on effect, right? Obviously, affordability and customer experience, these go hand in hand. And when you talk affordability, one of the main things you have to look at is because of the high cost, right? You have to what is called sweat your assets. An aircraft that is sitting on the ground is losing money for me. I make money on an aircraft only when it's flying. But at the same time, I can't keep flying the aircraft and have people paratroop off of that, right? So which means that I have to have maintenance. Now, so when you start building a network together, the first challenge that you have to look at is how do you get your aircraft to the maximum possible utilization operating, but at the same time get enough time for maintenance. And by the way, when you talk about safety, maintenance comes in. Every aircraft goes through a rigorous set of checks every day, right? So which means that there's nothing like, oh, it's not like your car that you take it for an oil change once in 3 months. The aircraft is inspected nose to tail every day physically by a team of engineers. One thing you might not know is the aircraft that gets parked overnight, no aircraft is ever without a physical human next to it at any point of time, because we can't allow the risk of somebody sneaking into the aircraft when it's parked. So there is always a human present at the aircraft at any point of time, right? So you have to figure out a way to get your aircrafts moving. But then I can't have my maintenance situated in every station I fly. So we will obviously have a maintenance station in Bangalore. We'll have it in Mumbai or Delhi or whatever it is. The aircrafts will be scheduled in such a way that you'll operate a set of flights, and after so many flying hours, it will land up in your home base for maintenance. Now that, just consider the problem, right? I have to make sure the aircraft flies. I have to make sure it doesn't spend time on the ground. But after X amount of flying hours, it has to be in for maintenance. I bring it in too early, I'm leaving money on the table. If I'm away from my home base when the X amount of hours are done for, I cannot bring the plane back with passengers. I'll have to ferry the flight. So let's say my maintenance base is in Bangalore and my aircraft after 600 hours of flying is in Guwahati. I cannot operate that flight because I cannot put passengers on it. So I have to have a crew which goes to Guwahati and fly an empty plane. An empty plane burns as much fuel, maybe slightly less than a regular flight. And I'll come to the fuel optimization in a little bit. So it's absolutely hyper critical to get these things right? Now, when you get these things, when you have disruptions, and this is one industry which is prone to disruption. I mean, COVID was a 9 sigma outlier, right? Whatever you want to call it that. But nobody saw that coming. But the impact, unless you've been living under a rock in Kandahar somewhere, everybody knows the impact COVID had, especially on aviation, right? But leaving that aside, rains in Bangalore upsets my schedule, right? Forget that. A few years back, there was this volcanic eruption in Iceland. Worldwide aviation got disrupted because all the transatlantic flights that used to fly over that couldn't fly because of the ash. And with that ash, it messes up the engines. Flights had to be cancelled. So think about it this way, right? The butterfly effect ain't got nothing on what the aviation deals with, right? So volcano erupts in Iceland, flights from Hong Kong to San Francisco are disrupted. How does it? Yeah, it makes a difference because the cascading effects. Because the same aircraft operates this way, and since I can't operate it this way, I can't have my aircraft sitting there, right? And that's the beauty, right? You need to eventually the aircraft has to come back to where you have to operate it from. So you have this huge chain of network planning with the kind of regulations that we have, and if you go through the kind of regulations we have in India, it's even more cumbersome than the global standards. Once you get your schedule out there, right, there's something called pricing and revenue management, right, which means how do you price your tickets, at the right price, get the right. Now, the trick is basically the airline seat is a perishable commodity. When the flight takes off, if I have an empty seat, I get 0 on that seat, right? So which means we have a team of data. Every airline has a team of data scientists whose job is one thing and one thing only: fill up the seat. And like somebody said, right? How do you manage your personal finances? I want the last check I write in my life to bounce, right? Which means I have utilized all my money and I go. So which means same principle applies on this one. When the flight takes off, I want that seat to be sold. I will have to sell it at the maximum possible value. If I price it too cheap, it sells out too early, which means the last minute when the business travelers come in who are ready to pay the higher price, I don't have inventory to sell. If I price it too high, I'm not going to fill it up, which means the plane is going to go light, right? And this is a balancing act that happens on every flight, on every day. And even a small airline like GoAir operates about 300 flights a day. right? You can imagine this. I have to be looking at monitoring this 300 flights for the next 365 days to say exactly what has been booked, what is my forecast of what I'm going to get, how am I going to price it, what is Indigo doing, what is SpiceJet doing. So you can just imagine the complexity of the kind of problems we are trying to solve there, right? Move away from that, we have the next thing, because the aircraft doesn't move by itself. I need to have crew, right? And crew planning is yet another animal, which is one of the most complicated problems that I have encountered in my life, just in terms of sheer size and scale of the optimization problem, right? Now, what makes it challenging is that any crew typically has anywhere between 5 to 100 certifications that they are supposed to hold, right? I'm certified to fly a 737. I'm certified to sit on the left side of the cockpit, on the right side of the cockpit. I can be a first officer. I can be a command officer. I'm a training pilot, cabin crew, etc. When a flight takes off with a set of crew, right, we have training and deplaning. There's a maintenance crew going around checking the aircraft. And I have to do this in the shortest possible time. Now, this is where a trade-off comes in, right? Because I need a minimum amount of time for the safety checks to be done. I cannot let the aircraft push back without the safety checks. But at the same time, I need the aircraft to move quickly, because the faster it turns around, the more I can fly. So all of these are pre-calculated, pre-optimized, and then the famous quote from Mike Tyson comes in, right? Everybody has a plan till you get punched in the face. So you've got a plan, you've got it highly optimized, you've got software that is churning out, the data scientists have done their job, and then somebody comes back and says, VIP movement, Prime Minister is traveling into Bombay, so airspace is closed, divert. When I divert, I'm toast, because I'm diverting potentially to a station where I don't operate, which means I don't have my crew on the ground, which means I have to coordinate with somebody else to support the passengers who are grounded. Then I have to recover the aircraft after that to come back here, by which time my crew is out of duty time, which means I have to get a new set of crew. Right? And why? Because one VIP decided he wanted to fly into HAL airspace. Right? And by the way, not a dull day. I'm not talking about onesies and twosies that happen once in a while. This is something that an airline deals with on an everyday basis. Every single day, right? Issues that you deal with, right? Pulwama, when Pulwama happened, the consequences were dramatic, because the moment Pulwama happened, the Air Force closed the airspace all around, in and around Delhi. Problem was, I remember at that point, we had 2 aircraft parked in Leh, one scheduled to come to Bombay and one to Delhi. I can't take off because the airspace is closed, right? The passengers are already on board, right? Now I have a choice, deplane them. But if I deplane them, and we are in touch with the Air Force, and they're telling us, keep them ready, when we give you the signal, take off. The passengers are getting restless because the AC is not on, right? And we don't want to tell them that, hey, listen, there's a bit of a problem, we are flying into a war zone. Right? That doesn't exactly comfort the passengers. Finally, at one point, we were given clearance saying, okay, you've got a 10-minute window, take off. And I will not forget that, because the 2 aircraft took off and they were escorted out of that airspace by MiG Bisons. Thankfully, I don't think the passengers looked through the window and saw the Bisons on their flying by. They were discreet, but the Air Force actually escorted the aircraft out, because the aircraft is sitting on a war zone. I can't leave the aircraft on the ground. I've got passengers that if I deplane them and the Air Force says take off now, I can't push the passenger. It's not cargo that I can just throw it into the back seat and just take off. Right? There's a certain amount of time. So these are the kind of challenges that an airline faces, right? And data science is the only answer, right? Every single decision, right, is designed with probably more parameters they can think of. And after all that, you have to have a recovery plan. Bulk of our time was spent on how do you recover from this? Oh, this flight got delayed. And because you're operating so tight, you don't have buffer. I can't come back and say, well, you know what, this flight got delayed by 15 minutes, but we'll make it up in the ground time. I can't fly the plane faster. I can't just go back and say, thoda accelerator dabao. Well, technically you could, but there is a fuel burn impact, right? And there is a safety impact. Right? There's a structural engineering that has to come back and say you are allowed to fly at this altitude at this aircraft. Same thing when I was talking about after Pulwama, the Pakistan airspace was closed, right? Consequences, right? Typically, all the European, we used to fly from the Gulf. You actually fly over Pakistan airspace coming in. Now, because it was closed, we had to divert south over water. Now, you fly at different altitudes. Typically, about 35,000 feet is what the optimal altitude for flying is, because that gives you minimum drag while giving you enough lift. Now, because of that space, all the European carriers that were flying to India and Southeast Asia they were already flying on the 35,000 altitude. So when our flights were taking off from the Gulf, they said, not 35,000, I'll give you 28,000. Difference in that, my fuel burn went up 20%, right? Which means I had to load up 20% more fuel, which means I had to offload bags, right? Now, how do I get the bags back? Oh, tomorrow's flight? Sorry, same problem. So we had to find Air India, which was thankfully operating at 50% loads. Say, boss, thoda bag le lo. Right? Because it's a cascading problem. It doesn't end. I mean, how do I get those? Because otherwise, the flight safety engineer will not approve the flight to take off because you're too heavy. Right? So anyway, I think I'm out of time. I can keep talking about this till the cows come home. Right? But what I wanted to give you guys a sample here is, especially when you talk about data science, to me, this is real data science, right? Because everything that you do, there is no model that goes back and says, well, I've got a good precision recall, 95% accuracy, real impact, real lives, real dollars. And by the way, the dollars are not small, right? Selling about fuel, right? Just that 100 kg weight, or optimizing the flight path for this one. I remember this one, a US carrier, about 60 aircraft, right? Which is quite small actually. The impact was, I think, about $10 million or $100 million a year. No, some weirdly obscene number like that, right? Just because they were not optimizing the flight path, right? And I think that translates to about 20 million pounds of carbon dioxide emissions additionally. So with sustainability in the future, that becomes another big factor, right? So you don't optimize your flight path, right? You are just polluting, 20 million pounds of carbon dioxide. They didn't change their network, they didn't change their aircraft, they didn't change anything. All they said was, take the best route. Or in Bangalore, Google tells you avoid this road and so that you don't have to burn more petrol. But effectively, it is the same problem on steroids, right? So huge amount of challenging problems, overwhelming for the most part, but the good news is people have done it. Much more smarter people than I have solved this problem. Just have to stand there, and then we kind of keep pushing to say what more can we do. Okay, I think I am about in big red. Time's up, right?